I walked into my childhood home after a 12-hour shift at the plant, expecting to collapse on my bed, like every other night for the past 2 years. Instead, I found my personal belongings scattered in cardboard boxes throughout the garage. My sister Jessica and her 3 young children had completely taken over my bedroom. My mother Dorothy calmly announced that Jessica needed the space more than I did, despite my $800 monthly rent payments. When I protested this sudden displacement, Dorothy called me selfish and ungrateful, reminding me that family comes first. What I didn't realize yet was that this betrayal would reveal a web of financial manipulation far deeper than a stolen bedroom. Standing in that garage surrounded by my scattered life, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The smell of motor oil and dust mixed with the familiar scent of my cologne from clothes hastily thrown into boxes. Everything I owned sat in disorganized piles, while my nephews Tyler, Madison, and Connor ran through the house like they owned the place. My mother Dorothy appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish rag, as if nothing unusual had happened. At 52, she still carried herself with the same stubborn confidence that had both protected and frustrated our family for decades. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in the practical ponytail she'd worn since my father died, and her dental office uniform suggested she'd just returned from her part-time job. "Brendan, you're being dramatic," she said, her voice carrying that tone that had ended arguments throughout my childhood. "Jessica needs stability for the children. You're a grown man. You can sleep on the couch until we figure something else out." Jessica emerged from what used to be my room, holding 4-year-old Connor, while Tyler and Madison peeked around her legs. At 31, my sister looked exhausted in a way that went beyond single motherhood. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her blonde hair hung limp around shoulders that seemed permanently hunched with stress. Her recent divorce had left her scrambling for housing, but I'd assumed this arrangement would be temporary. "Thanks for understanding, Brendan," Jessica said, though her tone suggested she'd never doubted I would comply. "The kids really need their own space, and David isn't paying child support regularly." That comment struck me as odd. I'd seen her ex-husband David at the grocery store just last week, and he'd mentioned sending money every month. But I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the immediate problem of having nowhere to sleep. "Mom, I've been paying $800 a month for that room for 2 years," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Ever since Dad died, and you said you needed help with expenses. I thought we had an understanding." Dorothy's expression hardened. "Your father left us with $23,000 in medical bills, Brendan. The house payment, utilities, groceries, insurance premiums. Do you think your little contribution covers everything Jessica has 3 mouths to feed and nowhere else to go?" The guilt hit me like a physical weight. My father Robert had died suddenly from a heart attack 18 months ago, just 2 weeks after his 54th birthday. I'd been living in my own apartment across town, building my savings from my job as a mechanical engineer at Morrison Manufacturing. When Mom called crying about the bills Dad's illness had generated, I'd moved home immediately to help shoulder the financial burden. "I understand the situation is difficult," I said carefully, "but I've contributed more than just rent. Last month alone, I gave you $900 for household expenses." "Which barely covered groceries for 5 people, Dorothy shot back. "Plus Jessica's car payment, the higher electric bill from having the children here, extra laundry costs. Brendan, you're thinking like a single man instead of someone who's part of a family." Mrs. Patterson, our neighbor from across the street, chose that moment to knock on the open garage door. Eleanor Patterson was 73 years old and had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She noticed everything that happened on our block, usually while tending her immaculate flower garden. "Everything all right over here?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her sharp blue eyes taking in the boxes and tension. "Saw them moving around and wanted to make sure nobody was in trouble." "Just some family reorganization," Dorothy said quickly. "Brendan's helping his sister get settled." Mrs. Patterson looked directly at me with an expression that seemed to convey more than curiosity. "That's very generous of you, young man. I hope everyone's being fair about the arrangements." After she left, I spent the rest of the evening moving my boxes to the basement where Dorothy had decided I could set up a makeshift sleeping area. As I organized my belongings in the cramped space beside the water heater, I tried to calculate the exact amount I'd contributed to household expenses over the past 2 years. The numbers didn't add up correctly. According to my bank records, I'd paid Dorothy over $19,000 in rent and additional household contributions. The original $800 rent had gradually increased to include utility payments, grocery expenses, and what she called family emergency funds. Each request had seemed reasonable in isolation, especially given my guilt over Dad's death and my desire to protect the family he'd left behind. But now, sitting in a damp basement surrounded by storage boxes, I began questioning whether my financial contributions had actually gone toward the purposes Dorothy claimed. The next morning, I found a stack of receipts that had fallen behind the washing machine during the move. They were all in Dorothy's handwriting documenting expenses I'd supposedly helped cover. But as I examined them more closely, several items stood out as suspicious. Car payment for Jessica's Honda Civic, $400 monthly, which I'd been told was an emergency expense. Childcare costs $300 monthly, even though Jessica claimed to be caring for her children full-time while looking for work. Restaurant expenses nearly $200 weekly for what Dorothy described as necessary family meals during stressful times. When I confronted Dorothy that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table paying bills, while Jessica bathed the children upstairs. "Mom, I need to understand where my contributions have actually been going," I said, placing the receipts between us. Dorothy glanced at the papers and sighed. "Brendan, you're nitpicking. When you live in a household, money goes where it's needed most. Jessica's car payment helps the whole family because she can transport the children and run errands. Childcare costs include the days when I watch the kids so she can job hunt. Those restaurant meals were during the weeks when nobody had time to cook because we were dealing with Connor's ear infection and Madison's school problems. But these numbers suggest I've been paying for expenses beyond what we originally agreed on. Life is more expensive than any of us anticipated." Dorothy said, her voice taking on the edge that signaled approaching conflict. "Your father's death changed everything. If you can't handle helping your family during a difficult time, maybe you should reconsider your priorities." That night, lying on an air mattress in the basement, I realized something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of our family dynamic. The woman upstairs wasn't just asking for help with genuine emergencies. She was systematically redistributing my income to cover expenses that Jessica should have been handling independently. But the revelation that would truly shock me was still waiting to be discovered. 3 days after being displaced from my bedroom, I was helping Connor look for a lost toy when I found a stack of mail underneath Jessica's purse on the kitchen counter. Most of it was the usual collection of advertisements and bills, but one envelope caught my attention because it bore the logo of the State Department of Social Services. The envelope was addressed to Jessica and had already been opened. As I moved it aside to reach Connor's toy truck, underneath several documents slipped out onto the counter. What I saw made my blood run cold. The papers clearly showed that Jessica was receiving emergency housing assistance, temporary food stamps, and childcare subsidies. According to the documentation, she had listed her address as a homeless shelter downtown and claimed to have no family support or steady housing arrangement. The monthly benefit amount totaled over $1,100. I stood frozen in the kitchen holding Connor's toy truck while processing what this meant. Jessica was receiving government assistance for being homeless while living rent-free in our family home. She was claiming no family support while I'd been unknowingly funding her car payments and living expenses for months. "Uncle Brendan, did you find Mr. Truck?" Connor asked, tugging at my sleeve. I handed him the toy, my mind reeling. "Sure did, buddy. Why don't you go play in the living room? That evening, I waited until Jessica was alone before approaching her about the documents. She was sitting on the back porch, scrolling through her phone, while the children watched television inside. "Jessica, I need to ask you about something," I said, settling into the chair beside her. She looked up with the distracted expression of someone expecting routine family conversation. "What's up? I accidentally saw some papers from social services today. It looks like you're receiving benefits based on claiming you're homeless and have no family support." The color drained from Jessica's face, but she recovered quickly. "Those benefits are for emergency situations. I qualified because I don't have steady housing or guaranteed income. But you've been living here for 4 months, and I've been covering your car payment and other expenses." Jessica's defensive posture shifted into something closer to anger. "Brendan, I have 3 children to support, and an ex-husband who doesn't always send child support on time. Those benefits help me provide for my kids during an unstable period. It's not like I'm getting rich off the system. The issue isn't whether you need help," I said carefully. "The issue is that you're receiving benefits based on false information while living in stable housing that I'm partially funding." False information. Jessica's voice rose. "I am homeless, Brendan. Just because Mom lets me crash here doesn't mean I have permanent housing or financial security. David might skip a child support payment next month, or you might decide you don't want to help anymore. Those benefits are my safety net." Her rationalization troubled me, but what happened next shocked me completely. David himself appeared at the back door carrying a bag of McDonald's for the children. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late," he said to Jessica. "Had to stop at the bank first to get your check." David was a decent-looking man in his early 30s who worked construction and had always seemed committed to his children despite the divorce. He handed Jessica an envelope, then noticed me sitting there. "Hey, Brendan, how's the engineering business?" "It's going well," I replied, then decided to address the elephant in the conversation. "David, can I ask how regularly you've been sending child support?" David looked confused. "Every month on the 15th, just like the court ordered. $450 plus half of any medical expenses." He turned to Jessica. "You've been getting all the checks, right?" Jessica's face went pale again. "Of course I get them. Brendan was just wondering about the timing." But I pressed further. Jessica told me that child support payments have been irregular, which is part of why she needed to apply for emergency benefits. David's expression shifted to genuine surprise. "Irregular? I've never missed a payment. I can show you the bank records if there's some confusion." The tension in the air became thick enough to cut. Jessica stood up abruptly, clutching the envelope David had just handed her. "There's no confusion," she said quickly. "Sometimes the checks just take a while to clear, that's all." But David was already pulling out his phone. "Actually, let me check something." He scrolled through what appeared to be a banking app. "Yeah, here it is. I've sent $450 on the 15th of every month for the past 8 months. Never missed one." Jessica excused herself to check on the children, but the damage was done. I now knew she was receiving regular child support, while claiming financial instability, living rent-free, while claiming homelessness, and getting my financial contributions while claiming no family support. After David left, I confronted Dorothy about Jessica's benefit fraud. She was in the kitchen washing dinner dishes, and her reaction revealed the true depth of their deception. "Mom, did you know Jessica is receiving emergency benefits while living here?" Dorothy's hands stilled in the soapy water. "She applied for help during a difficult time. There's nothing wrong with getting assistance when you need it. She listed her address as a homeless shelter while living in our house rent-free. That's fraud." Dorothy turned around, her expression defensive, but also guilty. "Brendan, you don't understand how these systems work. Jessica needs those benefits to get back on her feet. The bureaucracy doesn't account for temporary family arrangements or the complexity of divorce situations. Did you help her falsify the application?" The silence stretched long enough to provide my answer. "I helped her navigate the system to get benefits her children deserve," Dorothy finally said. If that means describing her situation in ways that qualify for assistance, then I stand by it. I felt like I was talking to strangers. These weren't the family values my father had taught us. This wasn't the integrity that had defined our household growing up. Mom, I've been paying for Jessica's car payment and other expenses while she collects benefits for being homeless and unsupported. Do you understand that I'm unknowingly participating in fraud? Dorothy's defense surprised me with its vehemence. You're participating in helping your family during a crisis. Jessica has 3 children who need food, clothing, medical care, and stability. If the government wants to help with that, then we're going to accept the help. That night, I lay awake in the basement trying to calculate how much money had been flowing through deceptive channels. But my financial shock was nothing compared to what I discovered the next morning. I was looking for stamps in Dorothy's desk drawer when I found a credit card statement addressed to me at our house. The problem was, I'd never applied for this credit card or authorized its use at this address. The statement showed a balance of over $3,000 charged to restaurants, gas stations, and department stores. Someone had been using a credit card in my name, and based on the spending patterns that someone lived in this house. I confronted Dorothy immediately, holding the statement in my trembling hands. Mom, someone opened a credit card account in my name. The charges show local spending over the past 6 months. Dorothy's face went white, but she recovered with a rationalization that left me speechless. I needed emergency access to credit for household expenses. Your credit score was better than mine, and I knew you'd want to help if there was a genuine crisis. You committed identity theft against your own son. I protected my family using available resources during an emergency. The true scope of their financial manipulation was becoming clear, but I still hadn't discovered the most devastating piece of the puzzle. That revelation would come later that day, hidden in a pile of mail that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my father's death and our family's financial situation. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Thursday morning, buried beneath advertisements and utility bills, like a financial bomb waiting to detonate our family's remaining stability. I found it while sorting mail before work, and the official legal language made my hands shake as I read the details. Notice of default and election to sell under deed of trust. The document began, followed by technical language that boiled down to one devastating fact: our family home would be seized and sold by the bank in exactly 63 days due to non-payment of the mortgage. According to the notice, mortgage payments had been missed for the past 4 months. The total amount in arrears was $6,047, not including penalties and legal fees. My $800 monthly rent payments, plus all my additional household contributions, should have covered the mortgage and much more. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the document, trying to reconcile this reality with everything Dorothy had told me about our family's finances. She'd explicitly said my contributions were keeping us current on all major expenses, including the house payment. When Dorothy returned from taking Tyler and Madison to school, I placed the foreclosure notice on the counter without saying a word. She stopped mid-step when she saw it, her face cycling through several emotions before settling on resignation. "I was going to tell you once I figured out how to fix it," she said quietly. "Fix what, Mom? You've been collecting my rent money for months while the mortgage went unpaid. Where did that money go?" Dorothy slumped into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking older than her 52 years. "It's complicated, Brendan. There have been so many expenses since your father died. Medical bills that insurance didn't cover, funeral costs, the children's needs, keeping Jessica's car running so she can job hunt. The foreclosure notice says payments have been missing since January. That's 4 months of my $800 contributions, plus all the extra household money I've given you. We're talking about thousands of dollars that should have gone to the mortgage." "It wasn't enough," Dorothy said, her voice breaking. "Even with your help, there wasn't enough money to cover everything." But her explanation didn't match the math. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app, working through the numbers while she watched. "Mom, my contributions over the past 4 months totaled $3,600 in rent alone, plus another $1,800 in extra household expenses. That's $5,400, which is more than enough to cover the missed mortgage payments. Dorothy's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Jessica needed help, Brendan. She was struggling so much after the divorce, and the children needed stability. I thought I could manage the mortgage payments once she got back on her feet. You gave my mortgage money to Jessica? I loaned her money for essentials. Car repairs, deposits for apartment applications, clothing for the children. I thought it would be temporary. The kitchen felt like it was spinning around me. My sister had been receiving child support government benefits, and now I learned she'd also been getting loans from money that was supposed to protect our family home. How much money are we talking about? Dorothy's answer hit me like a physical blow. About $11,000 over the past 6 months. I stood up so quickly that my chair toppled backward. $11,000 of money I gave you for household expenses went directly to Jessica. It was a loan, Brendan. She was going to pay it back once she found steady employment. A lone mom, Jessica, is collecting benefits by claiming to be homeless while living in our house rent-free. She's getting regular child support that she lied about. Now you're telling me she also got $11,000 in loans from my mortgage money? Before Dorothy could respond, Jessica walked in through the back door with Connor. She immediately sensed the tension and stopped in the doorway. What's going on? She asked. I held up the foreclosure notice. We're losing the house because the mortgage hasn't been paid in 4 months. Jessica's face went pale. What do you mean losing the house? I mean the bank is taking it back because my rent money went to you instead of the mortgage payments. Jessica looked at Dorothy with panic in her eyes. Mom, you said you were handling all the house expenses. You told me the loans wouldn't affect the mortgage. Loans. I turned to Jessica. How much money did you borrow from our household budget? Jessica glanced nervously between Dorothy and me. It wasn't that much, just enough to cover some unexpected expenses while I got back on my feet. How much, Jessica? Maybe $3,000 or $4,000? Mom just told me it was $11,000. The color drained completely from Jessica's face. For a moment, nobody spoke, except Connor, who was playing with his toy cars on the floor, oblivious to the financial catastrophe unfolding around him. There might have been additional expenses, Jessica said finally. Some car repairs were more expensive than expected, and the children needed clothing for school, and there were some other things. What other things? Dorothy and Jessica exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. Jessica, tell him, Dorothy said quietly. Tell me what... Jessica sat down heavily, avoiding eye contact. I've been having some problems with gambling. Nothing serious, just occasional trips to the casino when the stress got too overwhelming. But sometimes I lost more than I intended, and I needed help covering the losses so David wouldn't find out and use it against me in custody hearings. The room went silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My sister had a gambling addiction. My mother had been enabling that addiction with money I'd provided to save our family home. How much did you lose gambling, Jessica? It wasn't that much in total. Maybe a couple thousand over several months. You've been gambling with money that was supposed to pay our mortgage. I was going to win it back, Jessica said defensively. I had a system, and most of the time I broke even or came out ahead. It was just a few bad nights that set me back. I sat back down, feeling like the foundations of reality had shifted beneath me. My family wasn't just financially irresponsible. They were actively destroying our stability through fraud, identity theft, and gambling addiction. But the revelations weren't finished. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope I'd never seen before. Brendan, there's something else you need to know about your father's death. She removed several documents from the envelope, including what appeared to be insurance paperwork and medical bills. You know how we told you Dad left $23,000 in medical debt? I nodded, remembering how that number had motivated me to move home and start contributing financially. That number was accurate, but what we didn't tell you was that your father had life insurance through his job. The policy paid out $48,000 after his death. The words hit me like a truck. Dad had life insurance. Yes. Jessica and I used that money to pay off all his medical bills and funeral expenses. There was about $24,000 left over. Left over for what? Dorothy and Jessica exchanged another guilty glance. We split it, Dorothy said quietly. Jessica needed money to leave David and establish her own life. I needed security for household expenses while adjusting to life without your father's income. So the financial crisis that made me move home and start paying rent never actually existed. There was still a crisis, Dorothy protested. Losing your father's income created long-term financial pressures that the insurance money couldn't solve permanently. But you had $24,000 in cushion money while collecting $800 a month from me under false pretenses. It wasn't false pretenses. We genuinely needed help managing ongoing expenses. I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, except this wonderland was built from lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Every sacrifice I'd made for my family over the past 2 years had been based on fabricated financial emergencies, while they secretly divided insurance money and spent my contributions on gambling losses. Where is that money now? I asked. The silence answered my question before Dorothy spoke. It's gone, Brendan. Between Jessica's needs and some poor decisions we both made, the insurance money is gone. Poor decisions like gambling. Among other things. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for the past 2 years, believing I was helping my family survive my father's death. Instead, I'd been funding a web of lies that had now placed us all in genuine financial danger. The foreclosure notice lay on the table between us, a legal document that represented the culmination of their deception. We were going to lose our family home, and my contributions over the past 2 years had been nothing more than gambling money and loans that would never be repaid. But even this devastating revelation wasn't the complete picture. The next discovery would show me just how deep their manipulation reached and how much legal jeopardy they'd created for my future. The appointment with attorney Marcus Thompson was scheduled for the following Monday morning, but I spent the weekend in a state of sleepless anxiety that made every minute feel like an hour. I'd found Marcus through an online search for lawyers who handled both foreclosure defense and identity theft cases, though I wasn't sure if one attorney could address the complex web of legal problems my family had created. Marcus operated his practice from a modest office in a converted house downtown, and his waiting room suggested someone who helped regular people rather than wealthy corporations. The magazines were current, the coffee was decent, and the receptionist treated me like a person rather than a billable hour. When Marcus called me into his office, I was struck by how young he appeared. I'd expected someone older and more intimidating, but Marcus looked like he was in his early 30s with an earnest face and the kind of genuine concern that suggested he'd chosen law to help people rather than get rich. "Tell me about your situation, Brendan," he said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad ready for notes. I spent 45 minutes explaining everything: the rent payments, the displaced bedroom, Jessica's benefit fraud, the identity theft, the gambling losses, the insurance money, and the foreclosure notice. Marcus took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions that made me realize the situation was even more legally complex than I'd understood. "Let me make sure I have this straight," Marcus said when I finished. "You've been paying rent to your mother for 2 years based on her claims about financial hardship following your father's death. During that time, she's been redirecting your money to support your sister, who has been committing benefit fraud while receiving child support and living rent-free in your family home. Your mother also opened a credit card account in your name without permission, and now the house is in foreclosure because mortgage payments weren't made despite your contributions covering them." "That's correct." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the information. "Brendan, I need to be very direct with you. Your family has created several serious legal problems that extend beyond financial mismanagement into criminal territory." My stomach dropped. "Criminal territory?" "Your sister's benefit fraud could result in felony charges if the state decides to prosecute. Your mother's use of your credit without permission constitutes identity theft, which is also a felony. And if we can prove that your rent money was deliberately diverted from its stated purpose, that could be considered fraud as well. I don't want to send my family to prison. I just want to understand my options and protect myself from further harm. Marcus nodded approvingly. That's a reasonable approach. Let's talk about your immediate concerns and then discuss longer-term strategies. He pulled out a different legal pad and began writing what appeared to be an action plan. First, we need to protect you from additional identity theft. I'll help you file reports with the credit bureaus and get fraud alerts placed on your accounts. We'll also need to document the unauthorized credit card use for potential criminal charges, even if you decide not to pursue them. What about the foreclosure? That's more complicated. If your mother wants to save the house, she'll need to bring the mortgage current and prove she can maintain future payments. Given what you've told me about her financial situation, that seems unlikely without your continued subsidies. I can't keep paying rent to someone who's been stealing from me. Absolutely not. In fact, I'd recommend you start looking for alternative housing immediately. This situation is going to get worse before it gets better, and you don't want to be caught in the middle when everything collapses. Marcus continued writing while he talked. Now, regarding the money you've paid over the past 2 years, you may have legal grounds to recover some of those funds, particularly the amounts that were diverted from their stated purposes. How would that work? We'd need to document exactly where your money went and prove that it was obtained under false pretenses. The challenge is that some of your contributions probably did go toward legitimate household expenses, so we'd need to separate the fraudulent use from the legitimate use. What about Jessica's benefit fraud? Am I liable for anything since I was unknowingly funding her living expenses? Marcus's expression turned serious. That's one of my biggest concerns. If the state discovers the fraud and investigates thoroughly, they might conclude that you were aware of her living situation while she was claiming homelessness. Even though you didn't know about the fraud, you could face questions about why you didn't report her true living situation. But I had no idea she was receiving benefits. I believe that, but proving your lack of knowledge could be challenging if prosecutors decide to be aggressive. The implications of his warning settled over me like a heavy blanket. Not only had my family stolen from me and destroyed our home's security, but they'd also potentially created legal liability for me without my knowledge or consent. Marcus, I need to know how much danger I'm actually in. He set down his pen and looked at me directly. The good news is that you came to see me proactively, which suggests good faith on your part. You're also the victim of identity theft and financial fraud, which works in your favor. The bad news is that your family appears to have been systematically defrauding multiple government and financial institutions while using your money and credit to do it. What's my worst-case scenario? Mutin. Worst case, you could face charges related to the benefit fraud if prosecutors decide you knew about it. You could be held liable for the unauthorized credit card debt if we can't prove you were a victim rather than a participant. And you could lose all the money you've contributed over the past 2 years if we can't prove it was obtained fraudulently. What's my best-case scenario? Best case. We document everything thoroughly, protect you from further fraud, and potentially recover some of your money while your family faces the consequences of their actions. Marcus opened a filing cabinet and pulled out several legal forms. I want to start by having you sign some protective documents. These will give me permission to contact credit agencies on your behalf and begin building a paper trail that establishes you as a victim rather than a participant. As I signed the forms, Marcus continued his explanation. There's something else we need to discuss. Have you told your family that you're consulting with an attorney? No. I wanted to understand the situation before taking any action. Good. I'd recommend keeping this consultation private for now. If your family knows you're building a legal case, they might take steps to hide evidence or create additional complications. What kind of additional complications? Marcus hesitated before answering, suggesting he was about to share something particularly concerning. Brendan, based on what you've told me, your mother has already demonstrated a willingness to forge your signature and use your credit without permission. If she realizes you're taking legal action, She might try to transfer additional liability to you, or make financial moves that would be harder to reverse later. Like what? She could try to put the house deed in your name, making you responsible for the foreclosure. She could open additional credit accounts using your information. She could even claim that you authorized previous transactions if she thinks it would protect her from criminal charges. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. If Dorothy was willing to commit identity theft to fund Jessica's gambling addiction, she might be willing to commit additional crimes to avoid prosecution. What do you recommend? We need to move quickly to protect your interests before your family realizes what's happening. I want to file fraud reports immediately and begin documenting everything we discussed today. As Marcus gathered his files to begin working on my case, he asked one final question that chilled me to the bone. Brendan, is there any chance your mother has access to other personal documents that could be used for identity theft, social security card, passport, birth certificate? I thought about the filing cabinet in our home office, where important family documents were stored. Dorothy had access to everything, including documents that could be used to open additional credit accounts, or even file tax returns in my name. Yes, I said quietly. She has access to all of that. Marcus made a note on his legal pad. We need to consider the possibility that the credit card you discovered isn't the only account opened in your name. Tomorrow I want you to get copies of your credit reports from all 3 agencies and bring them to me. We may be dealing with more identity theft than we've discovered so far. The meeting ended with Marcus promising to begin protective filings immediately, but as I walked to my car, I realized that learning the truth about my family's deception was just the beginning of a much larger nightmare. That night, I lay awake in the basement wondering what other surprises were waiting to be discovered, and whether the family I'd been trying to protect for 2 years had already destroyed my financial future without my knowledge. The credit reports arrived by email the next morning while I was drinking coffee in the company break room before my shift started. I'd requested expedited copies from all 3 agencies, and Marcus had warned me to expect bad news, but nothing could have prepared me for the financial devastation displayed across those pages. In addition to the unauthorized credit card, I'd already discovered someone had opened 2 additional store credit accounts in my name at major retailers. A personal loan for $4,000 showed up on 2 of the 3 reports, apparently taken out 6 weeks ago, from a predatory lending company that specialized in high-interest emergency loans. Most shocking of all, someone had filed a tax return in my name, claiming a refund of $3,200 that had been deposited into an account I'd never opened. My credit score had dropped from excellent to poor over the course of 6 months. Late payments, high utilization rates, and defaulted accounts had turned my financial reputation into a disaster that would take years to repair even under the best circumstances. I forwarded the reports to Marcus immediately and received a response within an hour, asking me to come to his office that afternoon. When I arrived, he had the credit report spread across his desk, alongside what appeared to be a criminal complaint form. "Brendan, this is worse than we discussed yesterday," Marcus said without preamble. "Someone has been systematically using your identity to obtain credit and cash for months. The pattern suggests sophisticated fraud rather than occasional emergency borrowing." "How sophisticated?" "The tax return fraud required access to your Social Security number, previous year's tax information, and knowledge of your employment details. The personal loan required identity verification that goes beyond just knowing your basic information. This level of fraud typically involves someone who has daily access to your personal documents." The implications hit me immediately. "You're saying my mother has been planning this for months?" "I'm saying the evidence suggests someone in your household has been systematically exploiting your identity for financial gain. Whether it's your mother, your sister, or both of them working together, this goes far beyond the impulsive, poor decisions you described yesterday." Marcus pulled out a manila folder filled with legal documents. "I've been researching the foreclosure situation, and I discovered something interesting. The mortgage company has been trying to contact your mother about alternatives to foreclosure, including a modification program that would have lowered the monthly payments and prevented default. What does that mean? It means your mother chose not to respond to those outreach efforts. She allowed the house to go into foreclosure despite having options to prevent it. Why would she do that? Marcus leaned back in his chair. I've seen this pattern before. Sometimes people allow foreclosure proceedings to continue because they're planning to declare bankruptcy or because they want to blame the crisis on external factors rather than taking responsibility for poor financial decisions. You think my mother is planning to declare bankruptcy? I think your mother may be planning to transfer as much debt as possible to your name and then walk away from the consequences. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it explained several puzzling aspects of her behavior over the past few months. What would that look like? Worst-case scenario, she transfers the house deed to your name, making you responsible for the foreclosure. She maxes out the credit accounts opened in your name and then defaults on everything. She files bankruptcy under her own name, leaving you holding all the debt she's created. Can she do that legally? Not legally, no. But proving fraud after the fact is much harder than preventing it before it happens. Marcus opened his laptop and began pulling up legal documents. I want to file protective orders immediately. We're going to freeze your credit so no additional accounts can be opened. We're going to file fraud reports with local police. And I'm going to start building a case that establishes you as the victim of identity theft rather than a willing participant. How long does that take? The protective measures can happen immediately. Building a solid legal case will take several weeks, especially if we want to recover any of your money. What about my living situation? I can't keep staying in that basement while my family commits crimes using my identity. I agree. You need to move out as soon as possible, both for your own protection and to create clear separation between your finances and theirs. That evening, I began secretly searching for apartment rentals while maintaining the appearance of normal family life upstairs. My mother and Jessica were discussing plans for Jessica to apply for additional assistance programs, which I now understood were likely fraudulent applications that might involve my personal information. During my apartment search, I stumbled across an unexpected discovery that would change everything. While researching rental properties online, I decided to calculate exactly how much money I'd contributed to household expenses over the past 2 years. Using my bank statements and receipts I'd kept, I created a detailed spreadsheet of every payment I'd made to Dorothy. The total came to $26,400 in rent and household contributions. But then I started calculating the value of specific items I'd purchased for the house during the same period. When I'd moved home after Dad's death, the kitchen appliances were old and frequently breaking down. I'd purchased a new refrigerator for $1,800, a washer and dryer set for $1,200, and a dishwasher for $800. All of these appliances were purchased with my money and installed in the family home. The furniture in the living room had been replaced gradually over 2 years. I'd bought a new couch and chair set for $2,200, a dining room table, with 6 chairs for $900, and an entertainment center for $600. Again, all purchased with my own money for the benefit of the family. Electronics had been another major expense. I'd purchased a new television for $1,100, a sound system for $400, and a laptop computer that family members shared for $700. Even smaller household items added up significantly. New bedding, kitchen utensils, decorating items, tools, and miscellaneous household goods had cost me nearly $2,000 over 2 years. When I totaled everything up, I realized I'd purchased over $12,000 worth of furniture, appliances, and household goods that were currently sitting in the family home. Added to my rent and household contributions, my total financial investment in the family's well-being was approaching $40,000. But more importantly, all of those items legally belonged to me since I'd purchased them with my own money. If I moved out, I had the right to take everything I'd bought. The idea struck me like lightning. What if I didn't just move out quietly and start over? What if I took everything that was rightfully mine? I started making lists of every item I could remember purchasing, along with approximate purchase dates and values. The refrigerator, washer, dryer, dishwasher, couch chairs, dining table, television, sound system, laptop, and dozens of smaller items. If I removed everything I'd legally purchased, the family home would be left with almost no furniture, no major appliances, and no electronics. Dorothy and Jessica would face the foreclosure crisis without the basic necessities required for daily life. But rather than feeling guilty about the idea, I felt something approaching excitement. For 2 years, I'd been manipulated into funding their increasingly destructive lifestyle. I'd been lied to, stolen from, and had my identity compromised for their benefit. Taking back what was legally mine wouldn't be revenge. It would be justice. I called Marcus the next morning to discuss the legal implications of reclaiming my property. "Brendan, if you purchased those items with your own money and can prove the purchases, then you have every right to take them when you move out," he said. "In fact, removing your property might help establish your separation from their financial situation." "What about the practical aspects? They'll probably try to stop me." "That's why we need to plan this carefully. I'd recommend coordinating the move for a time when they're not home, having witnesses present to document everything, and taking photographs of items before and after removal." "Is there any legal risk for me?" "As long as you're only taking items you purchased yourself, there's no legal risk. You might face emotional manipulation or family pressure, but you're not required to leave your property behind when you move out of an abusive financial situation." That afternoon, I signed a lease for a 1-bedroom apartment across town and arranged for a moving truck for the following Saturday. Dorothy and Jessica had made plans to take the children to Jessica's friend's house for a birthday party, which would give me several hours to remove my belongings without confrontation. I also contacted my co-worker, Sarah, who had been following my family situation with growing concern. She immediately volunteered to help with the move and to serve as a witness to document what was taken. "Brendan, this is exactly what you need to do," Sarah said. "They've been taking advantage of your kindness for too long. Taking back your own property isn't mean it's necessary." As I finalized the moving plans, I realized that my family's financial manipulation had created an opportunity for natural consequences they probably hadn't anticipated. They'd treated my money and property as community resources to be redistributed according to their needs. Now they were going to learn what happened when those resources were removed. The reckoning was less than a week away. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me feel optimistic about new beginnings. Dorothy, Jessica, and the children had left for the birthday party at 9:30, giving me a projected 4-hour window to execute my moving plan. The rental truck was scheduled to arrive at 10, and Sarah had recruited 2 additional co-workers to help with heavy furniture. I stood in the kitchen drinking my final cup of coffee in that house, looking around at all the items I'd purchased over 2 years of believing I was helping my family survive a crisis. The refrigerator hummed quietly, filled with groceries I'd helped buy. The dishwasher contained plates and glasses I'd replaced when the old ones broke. Even the coffee maker had been my purchase when Dorothy mentioned that starting the day without coffee made everything more stressful. Sarah arrived at 9:45 with Tom and Jake from the manufacturing plant. All 3 of them had volunteered their Saturday morning because they'd been watching my family situation with growing concern for months. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked, setting down her camera to document the moving process. "I've been ready for longer than I realized." We started with the major appliances, since they would be the most challenging to remove. I had purchase receipts for everything which I'd organized in a folder for legal protection. The refrigerator required careful coordination to move without damage, but it was mine and I had every right to take it. As we disconnected the washer and dryer, Tom commented on how new everything looked. "These appliances can't be more than a year old," he said. "About 18 months. I bought them when the old ones died right after my father passed away." "Your family is going to have a shock when they get home," Jake observed. "My family has been giving me shocks for 2 years. Today it's their turn. The furniture removal took longer than anticipated because I'd purchased more items than I'd initially remembered. The living room couch and chair set required disassembly to fit through doorways. The dining room table was solid wood and heavier than it appeared. The entertainment center had to be emptied of electronics before it could be moved safely. As we worked, I found myself making mental notes about how the house would look when we finished. The living room would be left with only an old recliner that had belonged to my father. The kitchen would have no major appliances except the stove, which had been installed when the house was built. The dining room would be completely empty since I'd purchased all the furniture. "Brendan, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked as we loaded the television into the truck. "I support what you're doing, but it's going to be a dramatic statement." "Good. My family has been making dramatic statements with my money for 2 years. This is my dramatic response. We also removed smaller items that I'd forgotten about: a microwave, a vacuum cleaner, kitchen utensils, bedding, decorating items, and dozens of other household goods that I'd gradually replaced over time. Each individual item might have seemed insignificant, but together they represented the infrastructure of daily life. By 1 o'clock, the moving truck was fully loaded, and the house looked like it had been systematically stripped of anything useful or valuable. We'd taken photographs of everything before removal and documented serial numbers for major appliances as legal protection. I also completed one final administrative task that would have immediate impact. I called the utility companies and canceled the gas, electric, and water services that were tied to my bank account. All of those services would be disconnected within 72 hours unless Dorothy made alternative arrangements. The gas company said there's a safety inspection required before service can be transferred to a new account holder. I told Sarah as we finished loading the truck. That could take a week or more to schedule. "So they'll have no heat, no hot water, and no way to cook. They'll have whatever arrangements they can make independently of my financial support." As we drove away from the house, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The relief came from finally taking decisive action after months of being manipulated and stolen from. The anticipation came from wondering how Dorothy and Jessica would react when they discovered the natural consequences of their financial fraud. I didn't have to wait long to find out. My phone started ringing at 3:30 while I was arranging furniture in my new apartment. Dorothy's number appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times over the next hour, each time leaving increasingly frantic messages. "Brendan, call me back immediately. There's been some kind of robbery. All our furniture and appliances are gone." "Brendan, this isn't funny. The children are asking where their beds went, and I don't know what to tell them." "Brendan, if you took our things, you need to bring them back right now. This is theft, and I'm going to call the police." "I did call the police, and they said this is a civil matter. Call me back so we can work this out like adults." The messages continued throughout the evening, progressing from shock to anger to desperation to attempted bargaining. Jessica left messages too, including one that revealed how little self-awareness she possessed. "Uncle Brendan Tyler is crying because his bed is gone, and Madison keeps asking why the house looks different. I know you're mad about some money stuff, but the children didn't do anything wrong. How can you punish innocent kids over adult disagreements?" By evening, the tone of the messages had shifted to attempted emotional manipulation. "Brendan, your father would be ashamed of what you've done to his family. We're sitting in an empty house with no way to cook dinner or do laundry. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Please bring back at least the children's furniture." But the message that confirmed I'd made the right decision came around 10 o'clock that night, when Dorothy left a voicemail that revealed her true priorities. "Brendan, fine, you want to play hardball. I still have access to your personal information, and I know people who can help me replace everything you took. Don't think you can destroy this family without consequences. You've made this into a war, and I'm prepared to fight." Her threat to escalate the identity theft made it clear that moving out quietly wouldn't have solved anything. Dorothy needed to face real consequences for her actions, and removing my financial support was the only way to force that accountability. Sunday morning brought a new round of phone calls, but these were different. Dorothy and Jessica had apparently spent the night researching options for their situation, and the reality of their predicament was beginning to sink in. "Brendan, we understand you're angry, but we need to discuss this reasonably. Without furniture and appliances, we can't live in the house. The children need beds, and the foreclosure sale is still weeks away. Can't we work out some kind of arrangement?" But I'd moved past the point of negotiation. My family had spent 2 years treating my money and property as resources they were entitled to redistribute according to their priorities. Now they were experiencing life without those resources, and they were discovering what real financial crisis actually looked like. Marcus called me Monday morning with an update on the legal situation. "The police reports have been filed, and your credit monitoring is in place. I've also received some interesting information about your family's situation. It turns out Jessica's benefit fraud has been flagged for investigation by the state, apparently triggered by someone reporting suspicious activity." "Someone reported her?" "Yes, though I don't know who. The investigation could result in felony charges and demands for restitution of fraudulently obtained benefits." "What about the identity theft?" "The evidence is overwhelming. Between the credit applications and the documented financial fraud, there's more than enough to pursue criminal charges if you decide to take that step." "What would happen if I did pursue charges?" "Your mother and sister could face felony convictions, fines, and possible imprisonment. You'd likely recover most of your money through restitution orders, but your family relationships would be permanently damaged." "And if I don't pursue charges, do they face the natural consequences of their choices without additional legal penalties? The foreclosure proceeds, the benefit fraud investigation continues independently, and they have to rebuild their lives without your financial support. What do you recommend?" "I think you've already taken the most effective action possible. You've removed yourself and your resources from a toxic financial situation. Sometimes natural consequences are more powerful than legal penalties." That evening, I received one final voicemail from Dorothy that suggested she was beginning to understand the reality of her situation. "Brendan, we're staying at Jessica's friend's house because we can't live in an empty house without heat or appliances. The foreclosure sale date has been moved up because we missed another payment deadline. I know we made mistakes, but please consider helping us figure out a solution that doesn't leave your nephews and niece homeless." For the first time in her message, Dorothy had acknowledged making mistakes rather than blaming external circumstances. It was a small step, but it suggested that accountability might finally be beginning. But whether that accountability would lead to genuine change remained to be seen. 3 months after I moved out and took back everything I'd paid for the foreclosure sale was completed, and our family house sold for less than the outstanding mortgage balance. Dorothy and Jessica were legally responsible for the remaining debt, but they'd both declared bankruptcy by that point, leaving the bank to absorb the loss. The house that had been my childhood home was now owned by a young couple who planned to renovate it completely. When I drove by occasionally, I could see the progress they were making, new paint landscaping improvements, and the kind of care that comes from people who are investing in their own future rather than manipulating others to fund their poor decisions. Jessica's benefit fraud investigation had resulted in felony charges and a court order requiring her to repay $11,000 in fraudulently obtained assistance. She'd also been banned from receiving government aid for 5 years, which forced her to find legitimate employment for the first time since her divorce. The identity theft charges against Dorothy were resolved through a plea agreement that included restitution payments and 2 years of probation. Her criminal record would make finding employment more challenging, but it also meant she'd face serious consequences if she committed additional crimes. Most surprisingly to me, the legal consequences seemed to have triggered genuine changes in both women's behavior. Jessica had moved in with David temporarily while she saved money for her own apartment. Having to face the reality of supporting her children without fraudulent benefits or financial manipulation had forced her to confront her gambling addiction. She'd started attending counseling sessions and had been gambling-free for over 2 months. "I never realized how much I was risking until I lost everything," she told me during one of our careful conversations. The children having to move back with their father because I couldn't provide for them was the wake-up call I needed. Dorothy had found work as a full-time dental assistant and was living in a modest apartment near her job. The bankruptcy had eliminated most of her debt, but it also meant she couldn't obtain credit for several years. For someone who had become accustomed to using other people's money to solve problems living within her actual income was a challenging adjustment. I convinced myself that borrowing your money was temporary and that I was protecting the family, she said during one of our monthly coffee meetings. I didn't want to admit how much trouble we were in, so I kept making the problems worse instead of facing them honestly. The children had actually benefited from the crisis in ways none of us had anticipated. Tyler Madison and Connor were thriving in David's stable household, with regular schedules, consistent rules, and no financial stress affecting their daily lives. They visited their mother and grandmother regularly, but they were no longer exposed to the chaos that had characterized their lives when the adults around them were committing fraud and living beyond their means. My own life had improved dramatically once I was no longer funding other people's destructive choices. My credit score was recovering steadily as the fraudulent accounts were resolved and removed from my reports. The apartment I'd rented was smaller than the family house, but it was entirely my own space, furnished with belongings I'd legitimately purchased and maintained. More importantly, I'd started dating Sarah seriously once I was no longer emotionally drained by constant family drama. Our relationship had developed naturally over several months, built on mutual respect and honest communication, rather than the manipulation and deception I'd been accustomed to at home. It's amazing how much energy you have for positive relationships when you're not constantly being drained by toxic ones. Sarah observed one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. The legal battles were essentially finished, with Marcus having successfully recovered about $18,000 of the money I'd lost to fraud and identity theft. The recovery process had taken months and required extensive documentation, but knowing that Dorothy and Jessica were facing real consequences for their actions provided a sense of closure that money alone couldn't have achieved. The most important outcome isn't the financial recovery, Marcus told me during our final meeting. It's that you learned to set boundaries and demand accountability from people who were taking advantage of your good nature. Perhaps the most meaningful change was in my relationship with my father's memory. For 2 years, I'd carried guilt about his death and felt responsible for protecting the family he'd left behind. But learning that the insurance money had covered his medical bills and that the financial crisis I'd been trying to solve was largely fabricated had freed me from that misplaced burden. I'd established a small scholarship fund at the local community college in my father's name, using money I recovered from the legal settlements. The scholarship helped students studying mechanical engineering or related fields, which seemed like a more appropriate memorial than continuing to fund other people's poor choices. The most difficult aspect of the entire experience was rebuilding relationships with family members who had fundamentally betrayed my trust. But as Dorothy and Jessica demonstrated genuine changes in their behavior over time, we began having careful conversations about what healthy family relationships might look like going forward. "I understand if you never fully trust me again," Dorothy said during one of our coffee meetings. "I violated your trust in ways that can't be easily repaired. But I want you to know that facing the consequences of my actions has taught me things about myself that I needed to learn." "What kinds of things?" I asked. "I learned that trying to solve problems with other people's money doesn't actually solve anything. It just creates bigger problems and hurts people you're supposed to protect. I learned that taking responsibility for poor choices is less painful than continuing to make worse choices to avoid responsibility." Jessica's transformation was even more dramatic. Losing custody of her children temporarily and being forced to confront her gambling addiction had been devastating, but it had also motivated changes that probably wouldn't have happened under other circumstances. I spent years thinking that my problems were caused by bad luck or other people's actions, she told me. Having to face the legal consequences of my choices made me realize that I was the primary cause of my problems, which means I'm also the primary solution. The extended family relationships were healing slowly but steadily. Tyler, Madison, and Connor had adjusted well to their father's household, and they seemed to enjoy having both parents actively involved in their lives without the financial stress that had previously affected every family gathering. Most importantly, I'd learned that helping family members doesn't require accepting abuse or enabling destructive behavior. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face the natural consequences of their choices so they can learn and grow from their mistakes. The life lesson that emerged from this experience was profound. Enabling someone's harmful behavior isn't kindness. It's actually a form of cruelty that prevents them from developing the strength and wisdom they need to build better lives. True family love requires boundaries, accountability, and the courage to let people experience the consequences of their actions. When someone repeatedly makes choices that harm themselves and others, the most loving response isn't to keep rescuing them from consequences. The most loving response is to step back and allow them to learn from their mistakes, even when that learning process is painful to watch. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to face reality without your interference, support, or financial cushion. People can't develop genuine strength while being artificially protected from the results of their own decisions. The hardest part of setting healthy boundaries is accepting that you can't control other people's choices or prevent them from experiencing pain. But you can control your own choices, protect your own well-being, and offer genuine support to people who are making genuine efforts to improve their lives. 6 months after taking back everything I'd paid for and letting our house collapse when my money left, I could honestly say that every member of our family was in a better situation than when I was unknowingly enabling destructive behavior. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction. Real family love isn't about sacrificing yourself for other people's poor choices. Real family love is about caring enough to maintain healthy boundaries while offering genuine support for healthy choices. Have you ever found yourself enabling someone else's destructive behavior while thinking you were helping them? Sometimes the people closest to us need us to step back and let them face reality rather than continuing to rescue them from consequences. I'd love to hear your thoughts on setting boundaries with family members who are making harmful choices. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and share it with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about overcoming manipulation and building healthier relationships. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for everyone's well-being. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you think about the difference between enabling and truly helping the people you care about. Take care of yourselves, and don't be afraid to demand the respect and honesty you deserve from the people in your life.